in each person's residence, there is a real community here. So somewhere there needs to be more appreciation and more respect and trying to make people's lives survive and continue.
Thank you, Wayne.
Peter Marks, 107 Moore Street. I'd like to start by saying I get real nervous when I hear Heather saying she wants to move this along quickly. I get nervous when I hear suggestions that we ought to hire professional planners, because that presumes an outcome that I don't think we want in a neighborhood that has already experienced unbelievable change, most of it adverse and detrimental, in the 50 or so years that I can remember. We've set precedents already with what we call a planning process that have been, I think, exceedingly destructive. Some of us would just like certainty. We'd like to know that if we have a historic district or a historic building, that it will remain historic. It won't be obliterated, as were the houses on Alexander. It won't be transformed, as was the Dinky Station. It won't be built on, as is now, I understand, permitted for the golf course and the battlefield. And certainly, in one of the neighborhoods that defines the downtown, it seems to me that the best thing we could do is just leave it alone. We have lots of pre-existing variances. Leave them. That's part of the charm. Jim Floyd mentioned what I used to call the black community. It's been eviscerated. When I walk through the streets of the old neighborhoods where I went to school happily, I don't recognize them. Why do we want to make it worse? Just leave it alone. We don't need planning. Just leave it alone. Let people just enjoy it the way it is. Please.
Hi, Joseph Weiss on Lee Avenue. I have several questions. It seems to me we're embarking on a process here, whether to change the zoning. Is that the kind of structure of?
The plan was to get a sense of what the zoning allowed, because in the past, leaving it alone and turning a blind eye to what's on the books has gotten us into trouble. So the intention of council is to understand what's allowed now. So as a right, what can someone build, and does that make sense? Or is that something we want to take a look at? And, it is, if you look at the street, there's lots of different zones. Does that make sense? And so this is really the first meeting, and it's, we're doing stuff out in the open, so it's a little bit messy, and we're not necessarily exactly sure where we're going, but I think the point for tonight is to decide, as Mr. Mark says, do we leave it alone after we've heard the different zones? Is that what we want to do, or do we want to move forward and take a deeper look? That's really the question in front of us tonight.
Okay.
Ms. Howard?
I just had a quick comment, because I always appreciate Mr. Marks' comments, and his is well taken, and I certainly wasn't meaning to imply we move rashly. I think the question for the audience and for us is, do we want to be in position 5 years from now where we say, gosh, we should have stepped back and thought about what we want to protect, and do we want to take action? And we may not all agree on what that action might be, but that it's a worthwhile conversation to have, because we have time and again faced a situation where we didn't do that, and then we were in that pickle I talked about. And then we regretted being in that pickle. So I don't think anybody's talking about moving rashly, but I also don't think anybody ever accuses us of moving really quickly. That's usually not a risk you face with municipal government. So the fact that we're talking about this is a good sign, and I hope we'll keep that. And Mr. Weiss, I want to hear your thoughts too, but I think that's nobody's talking about moving rashly. The question is, are there steps we could take to preserve what we do love? And I was disheartened to hear, I'm sorry that I don't remember your name, the woman on South Harrison saying that somebody in the community said, I'm not going to go, this has been going on too long, nothing's going to happen. Oh, Wendy, love them, yes. So, I hope that's not the message to people, that we're not taking this seriously and that we're not considering action. So, but to your specific question, that's what we want to hear from you. Should we do something? Should we let it sit and let the neighborhood evolve? And you think the direction it's going is we should be hands-off and laissez-faire? That's the question.
I think it would be helpful to understand, perhaps Mr. Solo could explain or someone on council could explain, the mechanism by which this change would move forward. That's because, a conversation is one thing, but undertaking a somewhat, I imagine has to be some formal process that we go through that would begin the process of changing the zoning if that's what's decided.
Right. So that's one of the things we're going to have to figure out tonight, is if we do want to move forward, how we do it. So one idea that's been suggested is we start with putting together a visioning statement. What does the community want to see? What do the neighbors want to see? Another would be just getting some more information about the capacity of the current zoning and collect some more information before we decide to go on to the next steps. The other is to, instead of having another council meeting about it, to put together a task force or some committee that would do some of this work for us. So we're still, like I said, this is what it looks like when we're not exactly sure where to go, and we want to hear community input, and then we have to decide on next steps.
And do you have a sense of any kind of time frame for this process?
Well, we had, in our priority list that council did at the very beginning of the year, this was one of the things we put on it. And at that point, we had said that by the end of this year, so by the end of December, if we were going to hire some sort of outside consultant to come in and help with either visioning or with looking at the zoning, then we would put out an RFP by the end of 2014.
Okay.
But sometimes we don't always meet all of our deadlines.
Sure. And then could someone just briefly summarize the process? If zoning changes, if that process starts to move forward, what's the formal mechanism for moving that forward? Is that a resolution from town council? I'm just trying to understand the mechanics of this.
Well, to change the zoning is done by ordinance, and so we have a couple of other ordinances on the agenda tonight, so I'm probably going to have to cut this discussion off soon so we can make sure we get to those. But there's at least 2 meetings minimum, and these would take much more than 2 meetings. But you have an ordinance introduction, and then you'd have a public hearing and a vote on the ordinance.
Who drafts the ordinance?
Usually the planning department would.
Okay, thank you.
Doesn't the planning board have...
And it goes to the planning board as well, in between those periods, too. Yeah, thank you.
Good evening, Evan Yaski, Hawthorne Avenue. And I was wobbly. I was thinking about how this meeting started tonight. We had 2 inductions into our new police force, which was wonderful. I'm not sure if it sort of just happenstance, but I was thinking about our police force as a key institution in our town, and that we've heard from and have in the audience tonight some leaders from other major institutions in our town. From McCaffrey's we heard from tonight with a great initiative. The president of our First Aid and Rescue Squad is here, and it just made me think about some of the wonderful things about the town and why probably so many people show up to meetings like this. And then I thought, well, Witherspoon Street itself is kind of a major institution at the heart of our town and in the heart of many of the town's residents. And it's, as I think ex-Mayor Floyd talked about in somewhat eloquently, it's a very rich and vibrant street and corridor and place. It has this incredible history to it. It's got really kind of the locus of our town at one end. We've got this municipal complex at the other end that people come to every day, and it's sort of right in the midst of people's imaginations, all the residents of this town. So it's something that we have to treat very carefully if we're talking about changes to it. And then it's, I'm not sure that Mayor or Council have specifically addressed, kind of why it came to be. Why are we going to relook at Witherspoon Street, and what are the specific forces on it? Usually, when a major part of a town or city, some municipality is thought of kind of holistically, it's because there's a significant pressure for development or change in that area. One could think of, for example, up and down the east coast of waterfront developments, because older industrial land is no longer used along waterfronts, and they've been reimagined all sorts of ways. So that's just an example. But here, what is the pressure? And I believe there are significant pressures on the land up and down Witherspoon Street, and probably the Avalon Bay development is the cause of a lot of that. It's a harbinger of a lot of change to the corridor, and is probably going to put tremendous pressure on property values up and down the street and dispersing into the neighborhood. So it would be useful to just acknowledge that there are pressures on these properties, and that's something that we should address. And I happen not to agree with Mr. Marks that we should just do nothing, because to sit back and do nothing is letting a process happen without thought, without planning, and I don't think we're going to be happy with that. So I think that it's good that council is bringing this issue in front of the town in a public way, in an open way, because it deserves a lot of attention, and I think it deserves careful planning with professional guidance. That I think there are probably countless examples of how design has transformed and renewed towns and other municipalities, and this is a corridor that could it has so much to retain, but it can also become more than it is today, and I think through careful thought and planning and design, we can achieve a really wonderful new Witherspoon Street at some point in the future. And again, going back to my first comment about our police force and seeing these two new officers inducted to what's already a very vibrant force, it's sort of a metaphor thing. We can take something that we're all proud of, that we all enjoy every day, and we can renew it, as long as we do it carefully and with respect and thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And how many more people want to speak who haven't got a chance yet? Okay, I'd like to wrap up the public portion by 9:35 so that we can get some closure. And I promise you, if we decide to move forward, this will not be the last meeting. So I apologize if there are going to be some people who don't get a chance to speak tonight, but I do want us to be able to come back to council and get some direction. But yeah, Ms. Cherry, go ahead.
I'm Kip Cherry, 24 Dempsey Avenue. First, before my comments, I have a question for Lee, and that is, has there been an analysis done of the master plan versus the zoning, the current master plan?
Township-wide or for the corridor?
Well, I think with the corridor, but what I mean by corridor, I mean the corridor and its environs, the neighborhoods on the corridor. I don't just mean a narrow corridor.
Other than in a very general way, where in the land use section of the master plan, we talk about the various types of development, but there isn't a specific discussion of the Witherspoon corridor or the Jefferson Moore neighborhood or the John Witherspoon neighborhood.
Well, I'm a little concerned that we're skipping the master plan step. And we do have a master plan, and it's been updated and slaved over, and I think that we should analyze what's in the master plan now. And I don't think we should do rezonings without updating the master plan first. That's a normal planning process. I also think that we need to look at some of our major goals. For instance, historic preservation, I think it's been alluded to. But I think there's an opportunity in the Jackson-Witherspoon neighborhood for at least one, maybe two historic districts. And this is the time to do that. We'll never have this opportunity again. So I think that that's one of the big issues that should be considered right at the get-go. Secondly, I think that we ran into a problem with Avalon Bay in that we didn't have well-thought-out design standards in our ordinances. So I think we should think about that further, and that's town-wide. And the same thing with sustainability requirements. I think that's something else that should be in our ordinances. And this is a process that should take time. This is not something that you want to rush into. Also, on the issue of density, once you've increased the density, you can't take it back, because that would be a taking. That would be devaluing the property. So we're embarking on something that's really major, and we really need to know what we're doing before we just skip ahead. I think the infrastructure is a really critical issue. Sewers, sewage plant, schools. We really need to understand what we can do with our infrastructure and how much upgrading that infrastructure would cost us before we, again, skip ahead too fast. Density does have its advantages, but there's a small increase in density and there's a big increase in density. And once you begin to get into the density discussion, there are many developers that will be very eager to push for higher density. And there already are developers of that sort hanging about. So I think we need to be very careful about what we want from our town. The issue of porches that was mentioned, I mean, it may sound like a trivial issue, but it's the character of the Witherspoon Street area that people historically have talked from porch to porch. In fact, when I park in the neighborhood, I often park in front of the same woman's porch, and she comes out every evening and is talking on the phone on the porch, and I say hi and that sort of thing. That's the character, and that is a wonderful thing. It can be preserved by an historic district, but it also may be preserved by other things. And some of the new construction in the neighborhood has not embraced or even acknowledged the porch concept. Has really put it back on the street. So I think we need to be very careful about where we're going to go with that and not lose the identity of the neighborhood and its history. And we have an enormous history there, and we need to make sure we don't lose it.
Thank you.
The idea of a cultural corridor has been discussed before from Nassau Street to Valley Road, and I think that's something to look at further, is the concept of essentially uniting the town, the township and the borough, which I think is great. I just want to end with the repeat that we really need to analyze our master plan, and that's what the planning board is for, frankly, to do the master plan, to create the master plan and update it. And I really think we need to visit that before we go into the specifics of rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll have time for two more speakers this evening, and then we need to bring it back to council, unfortunately.
Good evening. My name is Jay Craig. I live at 300 Elm Road, Princeton. And I'm here because I care. Those are two important words, I care, that you should pick up on. I'm also here because I'm troubled by the term, a better Witherspoon Street. A better what? A better for whom? Better for whom? Better for whom? That term has ominous connotations, and another word that strikes me is displacement. If there is a better Witherspoon Street and zoning regulations are changed, who goes and who stays? Does money trump everything in this discussion? Will Witherspoon Street become a corporate Witherspoon Street? Or will it remain as it is? I'm troubled by that word, better. The preamble of the United States to form a more perfect union. We haven't gotten there yet after 250 years. I'm troubled by that term, a better Witherspoon Street. I see all kinds of shenanigans behind that term. A better term would be a more just Witherspoon Street. That would be a better term. Don't you think so? Then when you take that into consideration when you arbitrate or come to your final conclusion after all these discussions?
Yes, I think our intention here, and I think I speak for everybody on council, is we want to make sure that the zoning that's in place reflect what the neighborhood wants and what the community wants for the street. And I think there's a question, we've seen development that is allowed by our zoning, and we get surprised by it.
Is this exclusive to Witherspoon Street? Are there other streets in this town that you would like to see better?
I'm sorry if I use that term, I don't remember using it, but I think that we want to try to be proactive about...
And why Witherspoon Street?
Because...
Because why? Because of what?
Because we've heard concerns from the community
You've heard from developers?
You know,
You've heard from money interests?
No, I think it's important for us as a community to have a vision for it.
I realize that.
Right.
Right, but I have once again, I have trouble with that term, better. 70 years ago, I would have liked to seen a better Nassau Street.
You know, I don't know who said better, but I don't think anybody meant it the way that you have interpreted it. I think everyone is here because we love Witherspoon Street and we want to protect it.
Do you love it enough that no changes are made on Witherspoon Street?
Well, that's what we're going to talk about as soon as
certainly one of the things.
Discussion.
That's certainly one of the choices.
That's exactly what we're going to talk about.
Next comment.
Yeah.
Am I driving you guys crazy?
No, not at all. I think the points are important ones to make.
As at the very outset, I'm here because I care. And I see ominous undercurrents with this term, a better Witherspoon Street. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Stephanie Chorney, 11 Ray Street. That's a hard act to follow. Ooh, I'll hold it. I'll be brief. I just wanted to say, after listening to everyone's comments, that planning doesn't have to be change. Planning can be preservation. And so you're asking for people's comments, and I think you're hearing a lot of people like things the way they are, somewhat. But as we've seen with Avalon Bay, when you don't put things in place, things can happen that are not preserving the neighborhood. So whenever my husband and I are out, we might see a house we like, and my son will say, "We're not moving, are we? We really like," he says, "I really like where we live," and I happen to agree with him. So just because we plan for something doesn't mean it has to change in a way we don't want it. It's preserving might be the option that we go. So that's
Thank
all I
you.
want to say.
Okay, so now I'd like to bring it back to council, and I think the first question is whether we want to embark further on this, or yes, Ms. Howard.
I mean, I'll just start. I thought Ms. Chorney did a nice job of summarizing sort of where I've been thinking, which is that we're not looking for change's sake. The question is, are there changes we need to make in order to preserve? And are there issues with our current zoning that would open it up to changes that we would regret? You know, that 5 years from now we would say, "Gosh, I wish we had been paying attention." So I guess that's something in which we're going to need more expert insight. But that's something I would be interested in: is what is the best way to preserve and make sure we understand the consequences of our current zoning now that we have the ability to look across what was once two municipalities.
Yes, I agree, Heather, and I agree with just about everyone here. I would like to see one of our options, is a historic district. Looking at that as an option, but I think that the first concrete step we should take is the capacity analysis we talked about, and also the question about conforming properties, because I think we all are concerned about what could happen, but we don't really know at this point if we need to change the zoning. It could very well be that the best way to protect the neighborhood is to keep the zoning the way it is, but right now we don't know if that's the case. So I would suggest that we look at one concrete step is the capacity analysis and the conforming property analysis. And if we do anything, and we call it a vision, I also would like to add the preservation, a vision for preservation, because the word vision also, to me, does kind of have that connotation that the gentleman was talking about a better Witherspoon Street. And I think the vision especially that I'm hearing from people, is that it's a nice neighborhood and something that we want to protect.
I think I've heard a range of thoughts this evening from people whose opinion that I respect, and the thoughts range all the way from hands off. Let it go as it is, or let it go as it will be, to hire a professional planner. And my thinking on this really hasn't converged yet, and I think that I'm not ready to take one extreme or another extreme or a path in the middle. And I'd like to hear more from the people who live in and around Witherspoon Street, understand what people who live in that neighborhood and want to live in that neighborhood want to see for Witherspoon Street, and then, and only then, try and come to a conclusion as to how council might move ahead with what we either will not do or will do in a proactive way to try and preserve the neighborhood.
Mr. Whitman?
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. I guess I'm the only person up here that lived on Witherspoon Street for 46 years. So for me, so for me, this is a little different. I love Witherspoon Street. I love the people. Beverly Leach mentioned I love Linda. It is a community within itself. The businesses there, along with the residents, the residential units, we seem to all get along. There are ways that I see improvement could take place, but there's also a lot of places that I think should be left alone, and I got to agree with Peter Marks, stay the way they are. Princeton is a unique place, and it's unique because there are different places and there are different people, there are different sides of town, and Witherspoon Street has a mixture of so many different elements. So I love a lot of things that I heard today. I love the mentioning of streetscape. I love things that I heard in regard to preservation. So I would be interested in looking further. I would say into where we are today with Witherspoon Street, and it was mentioned earlier that why are we doing this? Why now are we coming up here and saying we need to look at Witherspoon Street? It was mentioned, are there other streets in Princeton that we should look at? Why Witherspoon Street? And I think one reason why I would like to look at Witherspoon Street is because I feel that it's vulnerable right now. I think Witherspoon Street is in a place where it used to be, I would say, undesirable maybe for some back in the day, and now it's becoming extremely desirable. Witherspoon Street is a very important street in Princeton, and that's one reason why I think that we should look at it. So I don't mind having more meetings, listening to the community, but I just want to say it's not a bad street. I love Witherspoon Street. My daughter turned 18 years old, and she said, "Daddy, I'm going to buy our house because I want to stay on Witherspoon Street." So I have no problem with Witherspoon Street. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with what else has been said on the dais tonight. I think this has been an excellent first step. It's been interesting to hear. It sort of conforms with, I think, what I thought I knew about the neighborhood, and that is that people do appreciate it. The neighbors like it the way it is. But, Peter, as much as we want things to stay the same, we know there will be change. And the idea for looking at this was really how we don't want to be reacting to the changes that take place. We want to be more proactive than that. And I'm so sorry that Mr. Craig came away with the idea that we somehow wanted to make the street better. That really isn't the intention. The intention is not necessarily to create a lot of change, but simply to understand what we have now, what we need to do to protect what we have now if that's what we want. I mean, we saw what happened with Avalon Bay, and, we all felt like we got pushed around a little bit, and we don't want that to happen again. So we want to be able to protect the things we really appreciate about Witherspoon and the rest of the surrounding neighborhoods. And we started with Witherspoon because there are obvious pressures, and we know we're going to have increased traffic, and there will be changes. So this was a great first step, and I think I would support some of the suggestions that have been made. I'm particularly interested in having some sort of goal of if there is change, what would we like it to be in the end? And I like the idea of the streetscaping, some sort of planning, and but I realize, as Kip made a very good point, that really it starts with the planning board. So, thank you.
I actually want to start with a question. Ms. Cherry mentioned that density cannot be reduced, it constitutes a taking. And I wanted to ask the question, is that accurate? And are other types of changes that potentially reduce the zoning, such as changing the floor area ratio, are they also not possible, practically speaking, under state law? That was not my understanding, but I want to get clarity on whether that's an accurate statement or not.
It depends. If you go through a planning process where you identify clear goals, have a rational basis for what it is you're proposing. Give you an example. Many years ago, over 20 years ago, the township rezoned some of the OR, the office research zones up on Bunn Drive from an FAR of, 30 or 40% down to 10 or 11. They did that based upon capacity analysis of traffic primarily. They also looked at sewer. They also looked at the environment. The big drive was traffic. So you can, but you have to do it in a planning process where you clearly identify why you're doing it, what the constraints are, and you need to take into account what's there. And I think we may be headed to some sort of just zoning capacity analysis as a next step to see what's in the ground versus what the zoning permits, because it's clearly not a reduction if what's already there doesn't meet the zoning, or if what you're zoning for you can't build. And by that I mean there are zones within the community where you can't build to the maximum FAR because you can't fit it on the lot. So we can look at that and report back to you as to where we are, but you do have to be careful. She is correct that as soon as you change or reduce an FAR or reduce the density, that property owner, that's the first thing they're going to say is you're taking some of my property rights. But I think if we do it in a thoughtful process and through a planning process where we look at all those issues and explain what it is and why we're doing it, we should be okay. I don't know, Trishka, you want to disagree, agree, or? So I hope that answered your question.
I think so. The impression I got is that if we go through a planning, or I had coming into this process, and into tonight, was that if we go through a planning process, we can deliberately change the zoning with intent. And so I guess I probably at some point, assuming we continue this, will ask for clarity around what constitutes a taking under state law versus what does not. Because I do know that we are, for example, not the most aggressive town with respect to zoning restrictions and being tough on developers. And I want to understand how other towns do that, given the advice that we've been getting legally on some of the constraints. And I'm not necessarily advocating for one or another position at this point, more than I want to understand what our options are. And I also want to be a little bit careful on something else I said and make sure that people come away with it with the right impression. I do want to get to a point where we can do a financial analysis so that we can understand the impact of zoning changes. And I think that what we're talking about with the capacity analysis is a step in that direction. I don't think it's a complete step if I understand it correctly. But I do support the request for both capacity analysis and conforming properties. Please don't read into this that I am asserting that I am against cost for cost's sake. For example, I've heard comments in this room and in other meetings where we don't want to encourage families because it's going to impact the school system. And I actually do not I do not stand behind that kind of a position at all. I think that part of a government's job is to provide services to the residents and to the families that are there. And when I hear that, I hear something that is very family unfriendly. And that's not a position that I think we as a government want to set as a policy at all. So I want to at least communicate where I'm coming from when I hear that and when I'm asking the question. I want to be able to plan and understand what we need, but that's not to assert that if the needs are there, we shouldn't try to meet them. In response to Mr. Craig and also Mr. Marks' comments, simply walking around pretty much any neighborhood in Princeton, you see teardowns and new construction, which is not keeping things the same. The zoning hasn't changed at all, but the construction is not keeping the character of the neighborhood the same as what it was before. And that is at the heart of the concern with the zoning on this corridor now. And if you simply take the lessons from that and also simply look at the chart that Mr. Solo provided on the different uses, you can see that property owners can be completely conforming with existing zoning and change the properties quite substantially. So if our goal is to preserve the character of the neighborhood, we're going to have to figure out exactly what we mean by that, given the freedom that property owners already have along that entire corridor. I am supportive of continuing this process. I would look forward to input from the planning board, and being relatively new to government, I'm not quite sure of the process with respect to where the council starts doing this versus the planning process and the review of the master plan, but I assume we'll figure that out as we go along here. And I am supportive of moving forward with review of the zoning along Witherspoon Street.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I also wanted to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I thought the comments were really informative and certainly help us as we move forward. I do hear interest from, I think, everybody in having Mr. Solo come back with a capacity analysis, so we have a better sense of what the current zoning allows, and we'll certainly invite the planning board back so we can have a joint meeting with them, and then maybe decide at that point whether we want to continue to move forward or not. Of course. Yes, we have, I can't tell you exactly when it will be. Our next couple meetings are busy, so it'll probably be not for at least another month or so. And I'll have to, I don't know how long it's going to take Mr. Solo to come up with the analysis, so. His eyebrows went up, so longer than a month.
I think we should also answer one other question that was asked, which is, are we only looking at Witherspoon Street? And the answer to that is no, right?
No, it's just, I mean, I think we have to do one thing at a time, but I think that the desire is for us to be more proactive in our planning, and we do have an opportunity and also an obligation with consolidation to take a look at all of our ordinances, and so this is an opportunity to look at them and make sure that they reflect the kind of community that that we want to have. Because, you know, a lot of them were written 30, 40 years ago and might not have all of the tools that are available to us now. For example, the form-based code is one example of a tool that is more modern, that wasn't around when I think most of these zones were put together. So it is an opportunity for us. Okay, well, thank you. And to be continued. Well, Nick is here too. Let's do the reports, I think, just another. Let's do the reports, and then we'll do the fracking. Yeah, because we'll do it. So we're going to move on to the reports, and then as soon as we're done with the reports, we'll get to the fracking ordinance, because I know there's people here for that as well. And we'll start with Chief Sutter with the police report.
Yeah, I just had to tell him.
We have a really wonderful police report if you want to sit down and listen to it. Go ahead. You're just talking to the mic.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to start by just pointing out two changes to the police report, actually additions that I believe, I hope are responsive to some requests from council over the last couple months. And if you go to the very back last page of the report, one of the first reports that I added was the UCR comparison report for January to June of 2014. Basically, I took these numbers right from the New Jersey UCR report, and Councilman Simon had suggested at the last meeting that we start some benchmarking, this is the start of that, statewide, and the next step would be nationally. So very simply, it's not very scientific. I took the index crimes from Princeton in 2014 and compared them to the rest of the county, with the exception of Trenton and Hamilton Township. And then I used three other municipalities that we used during the benchmarking, during the consolidation process. And they're towns that are similar in demographics, geographically, and socioeconomic makeup to Princeton. It's fairly similar. And what this report shows, very briefly, is that Princeton's UCR of index crimes, these are just the 8 index crimes, stayed completely stagnant between the same time period, 2013, 2014. And then you can see how we compare to other towns in our county, and then other towns that are similar to us from around the state. So that I can provide this type of report periodically as UCR comes out, and we can, the next step, as I said, will be to do it nationally, which is probably a little bit more complicated, but we've already started working on that.
So before you move off of that, on that table, the total percent change is what? The change from the same period the year before?
Yes, sir, from 2013 to 2014. So that shows that the same time, 2013, January to June, to 2014, we stayed exactly the same to the number.
Okay, because I looked at that and was finding that difficult to swallow, but you're telling me that's exactly what the numbers are telling us. Okay,
yes,
so
sir.
The next question is, can you explain the index row? I mean, you've got a violent, nonviolent, and a total, and then an index row. Can you just explain how those...
Yeah, the index row is specifically, UCR gets a little complicated, but the index crimes are used, the specific 8 index crimes are used to try to standardize crime reporting nationally. So it's the same type of defined crimes nationally, while the statutory requirements are different from state to state. UCR are exactly the same nationally. So those are the specific 8 index crimes, Part 1 and Part 2, reported during that given time period. And then the total is the total UCR for the same period. And I can actually forward you, I'm not giving you a full explanation, I can forward a definition that fully explains how these are categorized. It's a little bit complicated.
Well, one question I have just looking at this, because we're comparing to different towns, is are these normalized in any way, or are they simply totals? So, for example, per 100,000 people or anything like that, or is it
simply totals?
Simply totals. Okay, so in terms of a rate per population, we don't have that coming from this table.
I can get those for you. They do have that per 1,000 residents, crimes per 1,000 residents. UCR actually does record, so I can get that stat for you as well.
I would appreciate that. One of the motivations for asking for that is that we actually, the members of council and the mayor received an email from somebody saying that on a per square mile basis, Princeton has a high crime rate. And I realize that's actually not a very good measure, but I think a measure on a per population basis is a good measure, and I'd like to.
I can provide all of those numbers to you. Actually, they're recorded nationally and statewide, so I can get you. This was just kind of a snapshot where we are, very simply, but I can get you all that.
Thank you.
You know, because I actually think that would be more helpful than. I mean, I love this table and it's great information, but if maybe, can you do that going forward, or is it really hard to do?
They're periodically released, so every time UCR is updated, I can prepare a UCR report.
Okay.
Well, I think should we let you said you had 2 things and you went through one. So my question is about what I think is your second.
Okay, I have one more report working back to the front, which would be the second to last page, is a Princeton Police Department gender and ethnicity report for motor vehicle stops. And basically, very simply put, our officers on every motor vehicle stop that they conduct have to enter this information, gender, ethnicity, information into the stop. And it's recorded for each officer, and it's recorded in the aggregate for the entire department. So what you're looking at are, you can see at the very top where it says total motor vehicle stops. Do you have that in front of you? Looks like this?
Yes.
Okay. It has the total number of stops year to date at the top, and then you'll see percentage breakdowns for gender, ethnicity, and race. And it breaks it down to the total number of stops and also the percentages. So do you see that or no? Yes. Okay. So what we have is the aggregate for the entire department as it breaks down. What you'll find is it's pretty consistent with the census percentages nationwide and statewide. And what this does is it's kind of an alert. We look at it monthly, if not more often, or whenever there's a complaint. So we'll look at how the department is doing, and then we'll look at a specific officer either randomly, just checking, spot checks, or due to if there was ever a complaint. And it just gives some background information that is used to evaluate practices and how we can do better, or what we're doing well. And, we'll include this in every police report. What you'll get going forward is just that total motor vehicle stops will be updated year to date.
So I'll jump in there and it was actually going to be one of my updates to say that Chief Sutter came last week to the Human Services Commission at your suggestion, came to Human Services to update the Human Services Commission on two things. One, on the makeup of the force. I commented at the last meeting that the events in Ferguson, Missouri, and Staten Island had caused a lot of reflection on what law enforcement in town looked like, and so you came to the Human Services Commission and had a really good discussion going through this, and it was exciting, and it prompted the question that I haven't been able to answer yet, and I wonder if you know the answer is, do you know of any other police departments that are doing this kind of reporting absent a court order? I mean, you often hear about police departments doing it when they are under a consent decree because there have been problems in the police department, but what's exciting about this is that it's proactive and it's opening the department to scrutiny that, I did some searching today. I don't imagine that any other police department is doing.
I think you're correct. I think, unfortunately, these types of reports may have been born from court orders and things like consent decrees, but we're hopefully taking a proactive step. And, it's all there. All the data is there for everyone to see, and will be posted on the website and in the report monthly. So I think it's a step towards greater transparency.
Well, thank you for being so willing to take our questions. There's a book I use in my day job, How to Lie with Statistics, all about how confusing statistics can be, and so I think these comments about how to make the numbers more understandable and how they relate will strengthen the report. So we're getting there, and so it's terrific. One question I had that you could talk about it, there was a recent event, there was a bomb threat at the CVS on Nassau Street, and there was a concern from at least one neighbor who wasn't notified. And the question, if you could reflect on, is what is the proper procedure for not just handling the threat at the site, but for people who live nearby? And is there more we could be doing there, or?
Yes and no, I think, is the answer. I think we can always, I'm open to saying we can always do better. There's always room for improvement. I did get a couple concerns from residents, and I looked at that specific incident, and I can very briefly break this down for you and how the structure works. I'll do it as briefly as I can. We have a public information officer that is primarily responsible for the notifications you get via Nixle and things like that, for whether it be an accident or community-wide issues. We have a backup officer to him. Those are both sworn officers. In their stead, when they're not there, that job falls on one of our two communications officers with approval from that shift commander. So in incidents such as the bomb threat and the bank robbery, the drain on our resources is immense, and it creates gaps, and it's kind of all hands on deck. So I'll use the bank robbery for an instance. Those officers that are responsible for normally pushing out that information were out on a search and perimeter containment, unable to do the releases or notifications, and obviously the two communications officers were over their head just handling all the radio traffic and notifications to other departments and the regular calls coming in. So we have discussed this at Public Safety Committee, that I recognized a while back that this will occur, this could occur. I do have some suggestions and potential resolutions that could maybe mean some restructuring of sorts, but something that's definitely worth talking about. Now, one last piece of your question is, when we have a bomb threat, it's the people that we need to notify immediately, and we have that all in policy, and those people are notified, whether it be by evacuation. It's usually an officer at the door, knocking on the door saying you need to get out. And then what happens from there, we evaluate who should be notified, how can we notify the rest of the community. In this particular event, it just got to the immediate evacuation, and the moment and all the, it's just, it goes very high and comes down. What could have happened was as it came down, there could have been something sent out, and I recognize that, and we talked about that. Now, whether that would satisfy what the concern is of a resident or residents, I don't know, because it wouldn't be timely. It wouldn't be real time. We were actually getting press releases out probably as soon as we could have got that out. So we recognize it. I think we can work on it and make it better, and I'm open to all types of suggestions in making this work better. But overall, I think they're few and far between. They're really in the drastic cases. I think otherwise, we've been doing pretty good in that respect.
Have you looked at what other towns are doing? I mean, because I was wondering the same thing. Your explanation makes so much sense, but it's like I put up with all these traffic texts because I thought, oh, I'm on the police list and I'll get important information, and then it was disappointing.
We have looked at other communities, and actually other communities which I felt very proud of are looking to us. There's a lot of communities that have come in to see how we've gotten a lot of accolades for that, and the traffic ones are easy. Those are the ones where there's no emergency and we have the information kind of in front of us and it goes out. So we have done that, and I do have some suggestions that I think I can offer up in terms of slight restructuring that may make this better.
I was just going to agree with Jenny a little bit. I think we get all the traffic things, and it loses some credibility if we're not going to hear the important things in a timely fashion.
Totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Any other?
I also want to say thank you so much for doing the profiling report. I don't know what to call it, but it's great. I'm really proud of our community and of you, so thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. Thanks.
And congratulations on the 2 new officers tonight. It's really exciting to see that future face of the department.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
It's actually really a question for the finance team. Looking at the parking numbers, the violations are way down. Does that imply that we're going to have a budget issue downstream in terms of the fees?
Well, it's likely we could have some. It may be offset by other items, but we haven't evaluated that yet. We do have, if you remember, we brought on new traffic enforcement officers throughout the year. We actually have an additional part-time person that floats back and forth between court and out on the street. So, maybe they'll make a little up, but you can only write them if you see them. So I think they're actually doing a pretty good job right now.
But, Bob, these totals are way down.
I understand that, but go back to what month is the report?
July.
July, okay. Well, July is not typically very busy in town.
No, but compared to the year before.
It's doing January through July.
Year to year.
It's page 16 of the police report. So.
Well, all I can say is I know that we had people down. We were running shorthanded in that area for most of this year since we had our unfortunate incident. We staffed it the best we could, and now we're up to full staff, so hopefully those numbers will bounce back, again, if the summonses are out there. I don't know if Nick wants to add anything.
If I could just add something, I had our lieutenant take a look at this and get back to me with some analysis. And he did a comparison to this year to last year, and Mr. Brusheye 100% correct. Our numbers overall were down in personnel strength. They're up now. I think you're going to see better improvement and a trend upwards there due to the amount of enforcement that we can now have with manpower.
I got a ticket last week, so I can test that.
I was a witness to that, yes.
I have a question, Nick. We've now passed the summer season, and maybe tourism is starting to tail off a bit. I'm wondering what you've noticed in the way of tourist bus parking in the downtown area. Has it decreased? Are we stepping up enforcement? What's occurring?
We've been extremely vigilant in that area, very much so actually, and we saw a tremendous uptick in August. It was a issue for a while. We had several parking officers and foot officers assigned to that task. It has since come back down again. So to answer your question, it seems to be drastically declining. At least overall, there are times, specific times, where it seems more prevalent, but we're cognizant of it, and we do see a little bit of a decline since August.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chief. And are there council reports, starting with Ms. Howard?
None.
Ms. Cordova?
Well, I just wanted to quickly say that the Code Committee is going to be tackling our animal ordinances, taxis, alcohol, and advertising and signs coming up. And the Advisory Planning Districts Committee had a public meeting, and it was very interesting, and we got some ideas about the neighborhood planning program we're discussing, and we'll probably bring that to council in a couple weeks.
Great. Mr. Miller?
No reports.
Yes.
No reports, just that I thought that Council Miller just mentioned that the Affordable Task Force will be meeting soon, I guess. Should I say that? And Councilwoman Miller?
We have to appoint it
We're looking at names to appoint for the Affordable Task Force. So we're going to be meeting to find a way to appoint names for the task force. Yes.
No report.
Do you remember the extra brush pickup the week? I think it's 2 weeks from this week, if I remember right.
Well, I would encourage people to look on the website.
Yeah, we'll do it that way. All right. They decided to. Public Works Department has, after some prodding, decided to insert an extra brush pickup that wasn't in the schedule distributed at the beginning of the year. Please check the website. It will be a town-wide 1-week pickup. I think it may be 2 weeks from this week, but just to confirm, please check the website.
And I just have a few quick reports. The first is congratulating the Princeton Senior Resource Center. They had a nice event last night. And Princeton has also been named an age-friendly community by the World Health Organization. We're the first community in New Jersey to be recognized with that honor, largely thanks to the work of Sue Hoskins, who's our dynamite director there. And as part of that, there's going to be a plan, which you'll hear more about probably in the coming year or two, about ways that we can continue to make our town more age-friendly, which means making it more walkable, supporting our downtown, supporting parks and open space and things that people of all ages can enjoy. I also wanted to thank the group that helped put together the temporary parklet outside of Small World on Friday for something called Parking Day, which is when you convert a parking space into a little temporary park. And I wanted to thank Small World, the Public Works Department, and Zenon Tekchani, who's a local urban planner, who put it together really at the last minute. It was really wonderful and magical. As probably many of you know, Access Princeton launched last week. That's the one-stop call center for the town, 924-4141, and there's a mobile app or a website. So if you need to contact anybody in the municipality, any department, you can call that number, and they can either address your problem directly or get you in touch with the right person. And it allows us now to start tracking all of the issues that get reported to the town and to see how long it's taking us to address them. And finally, I want to just put on everybody's calendar. If you remember last year, for the first time, we had the Princeton University president come and meet with council, and we're going to do that again this year. It'll be on December 3rd, and so President Eisgruber is going to come back again for a discussion with us. And we're looking forward to it. And are there any more staff reports? Mr. Kaiser?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. 3 quick items to report on. One is the work is continuing at the hospital site. Contractors working on removing a portion of the deck of the parking garage, approximately 1/4 of the upper deck. That portion to be removed has been removed. They're planning to pour new concrete later this week. In addition, that there's been a temporary sound dampening wall installed in that area where they've been jackhammering some of those slabs. In addition, this morning the actual demolition of the hospital site started. It was the 1-story area adjacent to the parking garage. They started about 9:30 this morning, but typically their work day will be from 7 o'clock until 4 o'clock, and they're anticipating approximately a 6-month period to complete the work, weather permitting. If there's any noise concerns, those should be directed to the engineering department. We're working as a team with Jeff Grosser of the health department, and also if there are any other concerns, we have access to the Whitman firm, and also work very closely with the building department as well. The noise monitors are in place, the dust monitors are in place as well, and there were no incidents today. In addition, I wanted to report that the Old Valley Road Department of Public Works garage is scheduled to be removed Thursday and Friday of this week. And lastly, from the Public Works Department, I just wanted to report that the Shred Fest apparently was very well attended on Saturday, and they were very pleased with the volume of materials that they received.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a great event, and I made a mistake in my report. So President Eisgruber is coming to meet with council on November 3rd, which is a Monday, at 7 p.m. Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you, Lance. So it'll be even a month sooner.
Can I ask a quick question? Valley Road, is that going to require any street closures, the taking down of the public works?
No street closures at all.
All right, thank you. And let's see, I'd like to bump up 2 of the ordinances because I know there's people here waiting for them. We'll first take up the fracking ordinance, and then we'll take up the PFARS ordinance. So let's start with the ordinance public hearing, an ordinance by Princeton banning the use of hydraulic fracturing in the municipality and amending and supplementing the Code of the Township of Princeton, New Jersey, 1968 in connection therewith. And this was a ordinance that was introduced after being recommended to us by the Princeton Environmental Commission, and I think most of us, when we first heard about it, were surprised that Princeton was in danger of there being fracking here, but we learned that we actually sit on some possible gas reserves, and that we do want to protect ourselves because we do see fracking coming into more residential developments in other parts of the country. So I don't know if there's any other comments from council, then we'll open up the public hearing. Ms. Krummeller?
Well, I just want to report that the planning board did find this ordinance is consistent with our master plan, and I'll just quickly run through. It's consistent, and thank you, Lee, for putting this together. The land use element calls for to preserve, protect, and enhance the natural, cultural, and recreational resources, including open space linkages, steep slopes, floodplains, historic and cultural resources, and recreational and open space areas. That's the master plan also has a conservation element that calls for protecting and preserving environmentally sensitive areas and natural systems. Also, it calls for protecting the quality of groundwater and surface water to safeguard its use for the drinking water supply, recreation, and natural habitats. And it calls for then general conservation measures of our environment. So since fracking is a highly destructive operation with many risks to the environment, and many known, I mean, it's very destructive. That's not just a risk, that's a known detriment to the environment that I hope we can pass this ordinance.
Okay, thank you. And if there's no other comments from council at this point?
There is. I would like to make some comments.
Okay.
Thank you. The Princeton Township Municipal Code states that all uses not expressly permitted in this article are prohibited. That's in section 10B-254, which is the section of the ordinance.
You have to talk right in your mic.
Which is the section of the ordinance that we're modifying. And the Princeton Borough Municipal Code, describing the purposes of the Article 17A-200B, states to control the development of the borough's residential areas by limiting the density of new development in such areas and by preventing commercial and industrial uses. So given those two existing clauses in our ordinances now, in what zones is fracking permitted in Princeton?
I would have to agree with you that certainly if someone put the question to me, I would say no, it's not an expressly permitted use in the township, therefore it's not permitted. But I think by adding this to the list of prohibited uses, you're making it patently obvious. There's no wiggle room. You can't argue that it's kind of like something that is permitted. You're putting it in the list of expressly prohibited uses.
Right. It was my understanding that putting the expressly prohibited use makes it much harder to get a variance.
It doesn't make it more or less difficult to get a variance, but what it does get you around is someone trying to creatively argue that it isn't, in fact, a prohibited use, and then you go to the zoning board, and the zoning board has to do an ordinance interpretation, as opposed to just making it patently obvious it's a prohibited use.
Well, I guess I have a very serious concern with that line of argument, because if that is true, there are quite a lot of things that we should be adding to the list of prohibited uses, not simply fracking. All mining activities, for example, would cover fracking and a lot of other undesirable activities that we explicitly do not want to have occur in town. My understanding is that our existing ordinances are consistent with state law and state case law, that the presumption is that unless it's explicitly permitted, it is not permitted.
No, that's absolutely correct, yeah.
Okay, so...
and your zoning ordinance says so explicitly. If it's not expressly permitted, it's prohibited.
All right, so in summary, Princeton already bans fracking, and I'm opposed to banning it a second time. I'm going to vote against this ordinance.
Okay, well, I'd like to, at this point, open up the public hearing. If there's anybody who'd like to speak, and please state your name.
Hi, good evening. Nelson Obis, 291 Russell Road. I would really like to thank Mr. Simon for his comments. I'm here really, I couldn't have articulated any better. I do have a few things to add. I've been a Wall Street money manager for 22 years, so that carries with it some implications. I had a little different experience before that. I worked for Audubon as a naturalist. I was education director of the Appalachian Mountain Club and worked 6 years in state parks, Massachusetts. I've been a member of Friends of Neighborhood Open Space in Manhattan and chairman and two-term board member of the Stony Brook Millstone Watershed Association. All of those organizations would probably disavow what I'm about to say. But my concern really is that this is gilding the lily. The chances of having fracking in this township, that's not the appropriate term now, right? Municipality, excuse me, are about equal to me becoming the next captain of the New York Yankees. And while I realize that this will make us all feel good and it's a model ordinance, I actually am a little concerned that this sends out an enormous message of elitism in this town, which really does bother me. I take objection to Jenny's comments. We can argue it offline, but I do know this industry. I've visited fracking spots. I have investment in fracking service organizations, operations rather. I'd just like to point out a couple of things. First of all, fracking, I think, is the most important economic opportunity this country has had in decades. I believe that there is fundamental structural unemployment in this world, and that by having cheap energy, it gives this country an opportunity to compete in a global environment that we can't do very much about. We're not only talking about creating jobs in the infrastructure, we're also talking about lowering the cost of feedstock in industries where feedstock is an enormous component of the cost structure. And what that means is that we can't sit here and say, oh, we can't create jobs that only involve flipping hamburgers. If you want to create jobs that pay a decent wage, you've got to realize that fracking allows these kinds of jobs to be created in all sorts of processing industries where we couldn't compete globally before because we wanted to treat our workers sanely. Secondly, it takes away from us a lot of pressures that have been put on us internationally by countries that like to behead people, et cetera, et cetera. I needn't go into that. Last year was the first year since 1946 that we were energy sufficient, that we actually exported more energy than we imported. Finally, it creates enormous benefits for consumers in terms of the price of energy. And finally, I really do want to address something that you said, Jenny, because I know this intimately. The industry is quite aware of what the issues are in terms of the destruction of the environment. The concerns that there would be that there would be surface water pollution are really off the table now. Groundwater pollution is being taken care of. This is a fancy plumbing operation. Frankly, the environmentalists got off on the wrong track because they shouldn't have focused on pollution. They should have focused on the enormous amount of water that is required for these operations and the need to guard our aquifers. And there's an enormous movement going on now within the fracking industry to recycle the various kinds of water and the resulting pollutions. If I thought that there really was a likelihood that fracking could come into this municipality, I would have a totally different view. But I think you need a balanced view as citizens of this country where the jobs are going to come from, and not just disparage what I again consider, and there are a lot of people who feel that way in this country, an enormous economic opportunity this country needs to avail itself of. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Jim Benton. I'm the Executive Director of the New Jersey Petroleum Council. I've also had the privilege of serving my community in nearby Pennington, New Jersey as mayor for a short period of time. I'm also president of an organization called New Jersey Seed, which is a business labor coalition designed to enhance our economic and environmental conditions here in the state of New Jersey. It's basically a combination of the state building trades and the State Chamber of Commerce and other pro-development interests that fully believe they can balance the needs of the environment with the need for sustaining our economy and improving the quality of our lifestyle. I'm here today because I respect the effort that you've undertaken in serving your community as well. And obviously, I have now learned about the consideration of an ordinance to ban hydraulic fracturing in Princeton. While we are anxious to participate in the discussion and have done quite a bit of work in making certain that the public knows about the issue of hydraulic fracturing and the game-changing nature that this type of new technology embraces for our country, for our citizens, we must respectfully and sincerely disagree in opposition to the proposed ordinance and encourage all of you, in consideration of that, to become more familiar with exactly what we are talking about when we refer to this process known as fracking, hydraulic fracturing. And our opposition is based on the positive experience that this practice has demonstrated in making our nation less reliant on foreign sources of energy supply. It has contributed to New Jersey's baseload energy needs, which are basically combined of nuclear, natural gas, coal, and obviously a portion of which comes from renewables. I can go into each of those details if you'd like. It's already shown environmental benefits in direct contrast to the scare tactics that are often presented. It has shown that it can be a great benefit to consumer costs. For example, every resident in Princeton that gets their natural gas and electricity can anticipate receiving a 9% reduction in the commodity costs for this coming winter. That's on top of the $675 in savings that each resident has already realized in the reduction of the commodity during the past winters. And that evidence is further stated on your electric and natural gas bill by PSE&G. The practice of hydraulic fracturing has been in place for over 50 years. The new technology is the ability to drill down not only vertically, but then turn and go horizontally. That practice has really opened heretofore unreachable areas that do have deposits of shale gas, natural gas, and made that attainable. There is no evidence to suggest that Princeton is being actively considered as a location for drilling. Should that occur, necessary permits, community interaction are all a part of our recommended practices, and we do believe, in fact, that community interaction, that state interaction, would all be required well in advance of any area potentially that may even consider this being allowed, whether by exception or by stated permission. When you look at a recent U.S. Department of Energy report, just came out this past week, it underscored again that fracking can be safely conducted with little or no impact on groundwater. Further, the types of monitors employed in hydraulic fracturing, when it is undertaken, continuously monitor those activities. In fact, Lisa Jackson, the EPA administrator, former New Jersey DEP commissioner, in testimony before Congress, restated at a seminar that we sponsored in Atlantic City that there has been no direct evidence shown that, in fact, fracking harms groundwater. That was underscored in recent testimony by the new EPA administrator, Gina McCarthy. I encourage you to become familiar with her statement and her position on that. New Jersey air quality continues to improve in large measure due to the expansion of natural gas, again, as a base load energy supply in New Jersey and the region. And keep in mind again, natural gas is supplying our electricity, which is used not only in the wintertime to supplement our electrical needs, whether it's putting in your computer plug into the wall at night to charge your battery-powered smartphone, to heat your home, or candidly to just be used as part of your electricity makeup. It is that reliance that has really fueled this energy revolution. Indeed, in this month's magazine of Fortune 100 magazine, of some of the fastest growing companies, of those top 100, 25 are involved in fracking, some element of fracking.
Can I ask you, usually we ask people to keep their comments to 3 minutes. I wanted to make sure I give you ample time, but we have other things on our agenda tonight too.
Okay. To be fair, we hosted a day-long seminar in Trenton, New Jersey, regarding the practice of fracking. Had I known, I would have held it right here in Princeton. But as a courtesy to the new mayor of the city of Trenton, where we're professionally employed to attract policy leaders, we held it in Trenton. There was a comment made before by the director of police that take a look at different towns. I encourage you to go to Williamsport, Pennsylvania, right in the heart of fracking, and become more familiar with the process of fracking and the local impact that it can have. We believe it's positive. Their unemployment is next to zero, And in fact, industry is operating cooperatively with that presence there in the state. I encourage the council to set this resolution, this proposed ordinance, to one side. Be happy to answer any questions or make any comments in response to any other assertions you might have. Thank you. Our offices are in Trenton, New Jersey. I live in Princeton, and despite being mayor, my phone is still listed. So I encourage you to call. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm Jim Kilgore from Pretty Brook Road. I spoke earlier. I had some experience with this fracking in Pennsylvania. I have property in the area. One thing I think Mr. Simon says, I think he's totally on board that the ordinances here prohibit this activity. And most of the problem has to do with the spills, the poor drilling where the casing isn't sealed properly, not handling the frack water properly. Most of the problems are related to that, not the actual fracking itself, but the related accidents and problems. But I do ask, because this fracking can occur on leases, first of all, you need about 640 acres to effectively have a drill site. And you have to get all those property owners to agree to a lease. I assume New Jersey doesn't have what they call forced pooling, or requires you to lease even if you don't want. But anyway, I think the one issue is the ordinance. Can that ordinance, the ordinances that we have, prevent somebody from having a well site adjacent to us and drill underneath Princeton at 5,000 to 6,000 feet? Does that ordinance, those prohibitions, even if you don't have the industrial site location in the town, does that ordinance control that activity? Thank you.
I don't know how deep our rights go.
Jim, it doesn't, and I don't believe it can. And I raised this when the ordinance was first introduced, and I think the answer was that we would have to talk to our adjacent communities and convince them to have a similar ordinance. Otherwise, there is no way to prevent somebody in an adjacent community from doing exactly what the gentleman, both gentlemen described, and that is to drill down vertically and then drill horizontally. And it's been demonstrated that you can drill horizontally for several thousand feet.
6,000 feet or more, yeah.
About a mile. And then extract the natural gas from a deposit that's a mile away from where you drill vertically.
So do you think this ordinance would not deal with that issue?
I don't see how we can pass an ordinance in Princeton that would prevent someone in a surrounding community, and the deposits from the maps that I've looked at seem to go kind of north and west of Princeton. So pick a community north or west of Princeton, go a mile from our border, and if somebody could put together the right amount of property, they could drill down to the necessary depth and then drill horizontally if they found a suitable deposit. I don't think we could stop that.
I think as a practical matter, the more locations there would go would be for, I know most towns wouldn't approve it, like a park or whatever, because that's where you have open space, where somebody would go to a municipality and say, I can get you all sorts of money. Will you give us a permit to, these things are 3 to 5 acres. They're quite a disturbance, and they'll be there for 40 or 50 years, assuming the resources there. Anyway, I won't go on, but I just bring out those questions because it is a complicated subject. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a question on this topic? So property rights do not go down indefinitely? There's a point at which they cut off under state law? Is that correct? I mean, because otherwise that would be presumptively illegal, right? So I guess I'm asking the question.
Well, no, I mean, technically, when you own property, you own above and below, but I also know that the whole field of mining rights, I know less than nothing about. other than to know
Standard
that it's very
municipal
complicated.
Okay.
But, to the question of, this is really coming at it from a zoning perspective and simply prohibiting a use in the sense of a method of extraction. And we can only do that within our own borders. We can only regulate uses within Princeton's borders, and so something happening right on the other side of the border we can't control. That's the best I can do.
Hi, I'm Steve Miller from the Board of Health, and I'm the liaison to the Environmental Commission. And I just want to ask Patrick quickly, do you really think, after you heard those first two speakers, that there's no interest in fracking around here?
That's actually not the question. The question is whether or not it's permitted within the borders of Princeton. The answer is no.
I know the answer is no.
Princeton already bans fracking. That's the point. Prior to this ordinance, Princeton already bans
fracking. We should explicitly ban it. And we can't ban it in any other town. We have to encourage them to ban it too, if we care whether or not it happens here. I would also like to ask the gentleman from the energy, excuse me, corporation.
For the public hearing, you should, if you just make your comments, we can't do the Q&A because it just becomes unwieldy. But if you want to state your comment, and if somebody else feels the need to respond to it, then they can come up.
Okay, I just think that the fracking industry has not agreed to the Bureau of Safe Drinking Water standards yet, and they keep a lot of information secret. That's it.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Nelson. I live in Somerset. You may have heard about me because I traveled around the country, actually the continent, in my anti-fracking mobile. And quite innocently, I was able to talk to a lot of different people in a lot of states about what was going on. Sometimes I drove intentionally into some areas where there was fracking, and other times I found myself in an area like northeastern BC. And I was able to talk to workers, to residents where fracking is going on, and the stories were a lot of ugly stories. Not only worker impact, a guy who I met in a ShopRite parking lot in Washington State had just come back from the Bakken Shale. And I think if you research the Bakken Shale and the social impacts of the drilling that's going on extensively there and fracking, it's a horror show. So, and to the subject of elitism, I don't know what the question is. Should we not allow ourselves to be fracked so we can be like the Bakken, like the communities out there? The point is that fracking is detrimental. The industry really can't hide behind anything much anymore. It's been too exposed. The horizontal drilling does not just consist of one little tube going down and then one little tube going sideways. It's multiple horizontal drills. And they're basically blanket bombing, maybe a mile underneath the ground, but they cannot predict what that's going to do to the other surface areas above. I did meet a worker in Mackenzie in British Columbia who had worked in St. John. And he said, as a matter of fact, concerning water, that his team had emptied an aquifer just fracking 6 wells, emptied the aquifer. So you guys had to decide whether you need an ordinance or not, or whether you're already covered, but I don't think you should for 1 second think that this is a safe industry. It's essentially unsafe. We have had water contamination. Just go to Susquehanna County, go visit Dimmock. And as far as Williamsport, the news items I read on Williamsport that Jim Benton mentioned, Williamsport was a town that I read an article about all these people being displaced because the workers coming in were going to pay $2,000 a month for homes that were only worth $400 or whatever. So a lot of people were displaced. There's a lot of social impact with this, as well as the pollution, both to water and air. So I ask the council to consider all these, and also consider the fact that state parks, BLM land, are also open in this country, even national parks now, to drilling and fracking. Why do we think we're safe in our nice, genteel town if the industry decides that it's going to be effective for them, cost effective? They'll find a way to get in here. So I think any protections you can add, take them.
Thank you.
My name is Mary Ellen Marino. I live at 9 Horner Lane, Princeton, New Jersey, and I'm here to try to protect us from the dangers of fracking, which are very, very serious. Anyone who's looked into what's going on in Pennsylvania, we are on the Marcellus Shale. That's why they started in Pennsylvania. No doubt that's why they have an office in Trenton right now. They're talking about more jobs through fracking. That's exactly the opposite of what the situation is. I'm proud to have been part of the 311,000 people that were marching yesterday for the environment, and I'm proud to say that I was down on Wall Street today shutting down Wall Street on behalf of the environment. This is a very, very serious problem. We won't have in another 40 or 50 years, our children, grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren are not going to have a planet because of climate change. The men who said that there are going to be more jobs from fracking, they're not correct at all. The things that are clean energy jobs produce 15 jobs. 15 jobs in clean energy compared to 2 jobs in the oil and gas extraction industry is what the Citizens Climate Lobby is saying. All right? More jobs will be created by wind power. If there is safe nuclear power, but most importantly, the other measures of clean energy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Parmet. I live at 189 South Harrison Street, Princeton. I've been a Princeton resident for almost 50 years. I am here to say that I support you passing a ban on fracking in my town. I think it's the only sane thing to do, especially since we know that, yes, other towns can have it, but if we do it, then the towns around us will be more likely to pass bans the way they did in Middlesex County. The whole county has passed bans against fracking, including New Brunswick, which I don't think is a very elitist town. So please pass this ban. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Donna Fasanella. Gild the lily, by all means, please. I happen to have here from fracfocusedata.org. I just took a screenshot of this the other day. This is an actual well that's currently being fracking in Lycoming, Pennsylvania. Perhaps you know of it. Fracture date 4/16/2012 has the API number. I mean, this is all registered data. This is the real deal right here. You can find any well, of which there's over 77,000 in this country, 77,000 being fracked right now. So, let's see, the amount of water that it used when I took this, well, since 4/16/2012, total water volume, if you can believe this, 5 million, this is one well, 5,751,564 gallons. That's fresh, pure water. No doubt the industry would like to recycle the water because the drawdown permits, my guess, are coming sharply to a close because we're running out of water. Just ask any Californian. So other things that's not happening, other things that are not happening at well sites, they're not policing, or they're policing their own actions at their own well sites. There's no real oversight. It's a big operation, and it's usually way out in the boondocks, so you can't, you'd have to have an escort, you'd have to be bussed in, and everything's fine and dandy when you get there.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Well, it's almost 11, and we still have several pages of agenda left.
Just a couple of things that are really important. I've been studying this for 4.5 years as a matter of personal interest because I purchased a property in Sullivan County, New York. And the day I closed, May 18th, 2010, I drove around town and I saw all these no fracking signs. That was the beginning of my quest to find information. And I've written an essay that I'll pass out. But what I learned then is something, little known facts that most people don't know. And I'm just going to say 3 real quick. There's like an underground grid, right, of pipelines. Well, I don't know how it is now, but in the first years when this was getting off the ground, it was not uncommon to have explosions, but nobody really knew about it. You have to hunt and peck for really looking for these explosions done way out in the country in Pennsylvania and Ohio. And they're hard to find, they're not on the radar, but they do happen. And so they weren't being governed, there wasn't a lot of oversight, so you had big and small oil and gas companies drilling, and they were running into each other's pipelines. And spills do occur every day. It's just a matter of course. It's a matter of the industry. And they're not registering chemicals with the local EMTs, fire departments, hospitals. It's usually always an afterthought. There's a lot more, but I'll include it in my...
Thank you very much. Sure. Can I just get a show of hands to how many more people want to speak? Okay, I would just ask that, I mean, if you want to really speak, then we'll have to delay this to another meeting. If you want us to vote tonight, then I'd ask if somebody has already made the point that you plan to make, you can just say, I'm against this resolution, I agree with the previous speaker, because we, unfortunately, just time is short, we had a lot on the agenda tonight, but I want to hear, if you want to speak, please come to the mic and speak.
Hi, I'm Ruth Miali. I lived on Park Place, Moore Street, Hillside Road, so that was like 7 years. I've worked in Princeton 8 years, and I've been volunteering the last 5. That's my connection. My dad was a research chemist with Mobil Oil. Gasoline was his thing. So from him, I grew up with him, and I learned that you really have to think about what a substance is, and if it's not, okay, so water, if it's not just water, doesn't behave like water. So if you have these proprietary mixes that the frac industry this is what I have read, they use secret mixes. They won't admit, they won't tell what their recipe is, their formula. And from what I've heard, it's even kind of improvised. So that's what's going into this water that they're injecting through the base, near our groundwater and everything. And I just think of Princeton's fabulous, and this whole area's fabulous progress with organic farming, organic wineries. And I think even anybody just having a brewery, your equipment is not going to work the same if you don't have fresh, clean water. And I'll leave it at that.
I would just like to speak to Mr. Simon's point about what's the difference besides encouraging banning fracking, which has something to do with what I want to say. But it's that the things that are currently prohibited under the general stipulations, or whatever they are, there's not a current debate whether it's worth it economically or whether it is environmentally damaging or whatever. And because of that, I think it's important to have a specific clause saying we want to ban fracking, seeing as there is this current debate on this issue. as opposed to other ones which might not have interested parties coming here to sell you on it because everyone agrees on what it is and what it costs. So that's what I have to say.
And before you sit down, can you just state your name?
Oh, my name is William Imbert, and I live on 25 Palmer Square West.
Thank you.
Kip Chair, I'll be real quick. I just wanted to make 2 points. One is I think that fracking has discouraged the use of solar and wind power, so I think that's been a setback, actually. The second thing is, as you all know, we are now, I don't want to say the word fighting, but we are now involved with the Transco Pipeline, which is taking a great deal of effort. It's going to have huge implications for our town, and it's moving fracking gas. And we're now faced with a number of pipelines coming through New Jersey. So there are more implications than the water usage, the pollution, and all the other global warming and everything else. There also is the issue of these pipelines coming through very, very sensitive areas. And so the Ridge, we don't know how this is all going to work out. We have a meeting coming up with DEP now on the cultural resources on the Ridge. There are 4 historic places that we know about that may be impacted by this pipeline. So I just wanted to add that to the record. Of course, it really has nothing to do with the specific ordinance at hand, and I certainly respect Mr. Simon's thinking on this, but I just thought I'd add that to the record. Thank you.
Thank you. No. I'm just saying, if people want to speak tonight, they should speak, but try to just be considerate to
really condensed.
Our first aid and rescue squad is here.
Okay.
And he's still waiting for his ordinance.
Okay, I can trim my comments down for that matter. My name is Lauren Petrie, Food and Water Watch. Thank you for being here tonight. Fracking is, what it is in nature is really undermining. At a very definition, right? I mean, undermining the foundation that we build our communities on by cracking the ground underneath our feet, literally. Why on earth would you want to do this? And to Patrick Simon's point, I just want to point out that the industry can apply, and this is on the Princeton Municipality website, they can apply for a non-permitted use variance, and they can get the permission and the permits that they need to actually frack, even though it's not written into the code. And I can promise you that if the mining industry or the nuclear facility was knocking on communities' doors across the country right now, being as pervasive and persistent as the fracking industry, I would be here tonight telling you to ban those too. I promise you I would be here doing that. This industry does not care if people in your community live or die, if they have clean water, if they lose their mortgages, if they lose their farms, as long as they're making profits. Yes, gas is cheap right now. We're at a glut in the United States. We don't need it. The industry is pulling out so much gas from the ground that they don't have a place to store it. So they're building pipelines. Welcome, Lady Southeast Expansion Project. Here we are in Princeton with the fracking industry trying to expand infrastructure in your community. And I guarantee you that once they can expand LNG facilities to start selling that gas overseas, you will see a rise in those cheap prices. Goodbye 9% reduction in your gas prices. Now they're going to go through the roof. Because now, guess what? They're getting $16 to $18 for the same amount of gas that Americans would be paying $2 for over here. And if you're in the market for selling hydrocarbons, you're going to sell to the highest bidder. And once you open that up to an international market, your prices are going to skyrocket. Americans will no longer be able to afford natural gas. But we'll be locked into it, right? Because we've built all of this infrastructure around it. So basically, it'll be American gas for overseas markets, polluted water, contaminated land and air for American people, thanks to the fracking industry. And we do definitely address the issue of water. Millions of gallons, as we've heard, used for fracking, contaminated with water, and no treatment facilities can separate the chemicals from the water. So now we've basically taken billions of gallons and taken that out of our hydrologic cycle. And we're facing severe weather. We're going to need water down the road, right? We need that to survive. But we're taking it out of the hydrologic cycle when we're fracking with it. And as far as recycling is concerned, a lot of states are realizing that they can't recycle fracking fluid because it is way too salty, it corrodes the pipes. So they can't even recycle it. They just have to find some way to hide it under the rug, store it in our landfills, in our municipal treatment plants, wait till nobody's looking and dump it in riverbeds. This is what's happening across the country. If this industry was so safe and so clean, why would it need all of the exemptions that it got in 2005 from the Energy Policy Act, exemptions from the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, Superfund, and the list goes on. Setbacks across the country, we see 100, 150 feet. They can do this next to your church, your home, your school, wherever they want to, they will do it. You know, all it takes is 1 acre, not 600 and something, as was already mentioned. So to that notion, you know, I want to wrap up my comments here and just thank the council so much for taking the step to protect their community, to put people over profits, and to really, you know, there's been a lot of talk about preserving Princeton and holding on to the integrity of the community, and I think that the best thing that you can do tonight is to ban fracking. You're looking down the road and you're saying, you know what, we can see that this might be an issue in the future, and we're going to take care of that right now preemptively. And I thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you. I'd now like to close the public hearing. Yeah, Ms. Krummeller?
I'd like to move the ordinance.
Second.
Second.
It's moved by Ms. Krummeller and seconded by Mr. Lieberman. And Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Ms. Crum-Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
I'm voting yes. I'm voting yes, not because I believe that there's any possibility of fracking industry coming into Princeton, but because I believe that the fracking industry, like almost every industry that extracts resources from the ground, is essentially an ugly industry and does not belong in a residential neighborhood. And I think what we're doing here tonight is making a statement, and I'm voting yes for the statement.
Mr. Liverman?
Yes.
Ms. Butler?
Yes.
Mr. Simon?
No, I believe, and I'm voting no because I asked the question when the ordinance was introduced, why don't we simply ban all oil and gas drilling? And the answer is we already do. And I'm voting no because the arguments that are being put forth that state that we need this and it somehow protects Princeton actually undermine the rest of our ordinances by saying that they're not strong enough. And fortunately, that has no legal weight at this point, but we really should not responsibly make arguments like that. It's completely irresponsible. If it ever became the case that in New Jersey we needed to start listing out all the prohibited uses, we would be doing much more than what we're doing here tonight.
So the ordinance passes.
Motion carries.
Motion carries 5-1. Thank you. You still alive, awake? All right. Now we move on to an ordinance by Princeton authorizing the acquisition of 8 Clearview Avenue, Block 7307, Lot 2, Princeton Tax Map, and 14 Clearview Avenue, Block 7307, Lot 3, Princeton Tax Map, from the Princeton First Aid and Rescue Squad pursuant to NJSA 40A 2-3 et sec. Are there any questions about this ordinance before we open the public hearing, or comments? All right, I'd like to open the public hearing on this ordinance. You don't have to speak if you don't want to, but you're welcome to. All right, does anybody have questions for Mark? No? All right.
I'll move. My only question is, has there been any new information since we introduced the ordinance
No, Mark was
several
here
weeks
to
ago?
just generally give you an update. They're continuing to work on design of the project. As you heard from Mr. Kaiser, the building's coming down tomorrow. We've inspected these properties. There are no environmental issues on them that we, need to deal with. And Mark was here just in case you had any questions. We'll continue to work the financial aspects over the next several weeks and keep you abreast as to where we are with that. But until they have a design we can work from, we're kind of we just really don't have anything to report as far as that goes, because they're not going to start fundraising until they have a design that they can fundraise to.
Okay. Is there a motion?
I'll move.
I need to close the public hearing. Ms. Chair, you want to talk?
I just have a quick question. What's the valuation of this transaction?
It was in the ordinance.
Right now, it's $100, but there's going to be there's going to be a trade of land eventually where we'll do the evaluation on properties, right? Those were the ordinance.
There's no trade in land.
We did an assessment.
We will assume these properties, and there will be an offset to the ultimate financing if the project gets built. That's the way that would work. And as Mrs. Quinn-Miller said, that there were appraisals done on the properties, and in round numbers, I think they were around the $500,000 apiece.
Okay.
Okay. Is there a
motion on the table?
No, it has not been moved. I'm going to close the public hearing.
I'll move it. Second.
As it's been moved by Mr. Simon and seconded by Mr. Liverman. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Ms. Crummiller?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Liverman?
Yes.
Ms. Butler?
Yes.
Mr. Simon?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, that motion passes unanimously. And we'll go up to the first public hearing, an ordinance concerning mid-block crosswalks within Princeton, amending the Code of the Borough of Princeton, New Jersey, 1972. And this was really to just a house cleaning ordinance, so we're listing all the mid-block crosswalks. And I'd like to open the public hearing. And seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. And are there any comments? Moved by Ms. Butler.
Second.
And seconded by Ms. Crummiller. Madam Clerk, please read the roll.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Ms. Crummiller?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Liverman?
Yeah.
Ms. Butler?
Yes.
Mr. Simon?
Yes.
Motion carries.
That passes unanimously. And the next ordinance on the recreation and parks, there's some cleanup that still needs to be done, so I'd like to carry this to the October 13th meeting so we can get a cleanup ordinance. And now we have two ordinance introductions tonight. The first one is an ordinance creating a no parking zone on a portion of Markham Road and amending the Code of the Borough of Princeton, New Jersey, 1974.
I'll move it.
Second.
Is moved by Ms. Crummiller and seconded by Ms. Butler. Are there any comments or questions on this ordinance? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Ms. Crummiller?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Liverman?
Yes.
Ms. Butler?
Yes.
And Mr. Simon?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. The next is an ordinance.
The public hearing?
Oh, sorry, the public hearing, thank you, will be on October 13th, 2014. The next ordinance introduction is a bond ordinance by the municipality of Princeton authorizing as a local improvement the construction of sidewalks along Poe Road, appropriating the sum of $38,500, therefore providing for the financing of said appropriation by the making of a down payment and issuance of bonds or notes of said municipality, and further providing for the special assessment of 50% of the cost thereof. And I had a question. Did notice go out to all the residents for the ordinance introduction, or does that just go out for the public hearing? For the sidewalks?
No notification has gone out for this meeting, but I would recommend that a notification be sent out for the public hearing, of course.
Okay. All right, are there any? Moved. It's moved by Ms. Butler.
Second.
And seconded by Mr. Liverman. Madam, are there any other questions or discussion on this? All right, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Ms. Crummiller?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Liverman?
Yes.
Ms. Butler?
Yes.
And Mr. Simon?
Yes.
The introduction resolution or motion passes unanimously. Sorry. It's not working quite right. And the public hearing for this ordinance will be on October 27th, 2014. And now we move to our resolutions. The first, 14-274, resolution authorizing use of state contract number A81381 by Princeton Monument Hall video surveillance for $33,650.
Can we get an explanation on that?
No. When we had the former Borough Hall up there, we had police presence. We had a video system in there that was monitored all the time. Right now, we don't have that same type of system, yet we still have evening meetings in there. The building's open till 10 o'clock. What we want to do is take the system that is currently in Borough or Monument Hall, upgrade it so that it can be seen down here by our police in case there are any issues.
Have there been any issues?
Well, we had some, yeah, we did have some, nothing dangerous or anything like that, but we did have some thefts in the building. So, things like that. But, I mean, the building is open late, it's open on weekends. We just felt that for this kind of money, it's best that we monitor our facilities.
Jenny Lee?
No, she is making a pit stop and urged us to go ahead without her. She'll be back.
Well, it's just that this seems like a lot of money. I know she's put a lot of cameras in around her house. I was going to call on her expertise.
Oh, but she said she looked ahead to the agenda and was comfortable with anything on it.
All
And
right.
she didn't have any concerns.
All right.
So is there a motion for this?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Lieberman and seconded by Ms. Howard. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And we've lost, for the moment,